every once in a while I like to step back and sort of chart our progress. So remember that at the beginning of the semester we started talking about democracy. We realized that any discussion of journalism and the role of media depends on an understanding of democracy, what kind of democracy we live in, what kind of democracy we want. Right? So always keep in mind that in this class we're looking at journalism not simply as a business, not simply as a job, a trade, a craft, but as an institution that is relevant to the conduct of democratic self-governance. Okay? In the segment of the course after that, we took up the Bennett book and started dealing with some of these basic questions about neutrality and ideology, how to understand the place from which journalists work. Okay? And this segment of the course, we're going to go forward and apply some of those basic ideas to journalistic practices. Okay? I thought we'd take a minute to remind ourselves that journalism is a profession that's struggling right now. Remember, we talked earlier in the semester about changes, the digital revolution, all sorts of things that have changed the business model for journalism. So what was, when I was growing up, a fairly steady and stable industry is now in flux. If you're reading the news, you know that. Journalism institutions looking for consistent and stable revenue streams so they can fund the activity they can do. At the same time as the business model is struggling, there's a lot of critique of journalism, especially critiques of the way journalism has become more like entertainment than it has like serious discussion of issues. So you hear a lot of critique of what's sometimes called the entertainmentization or infotainment. A lot of people who think that journalism, especially television journalism, is inadequate. So we should remember that those critiques are out there. I thought I'd start by playing you a clip of an interesting bit of testimony that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton gave in front of a congressional committee. The larger context was about the role of the United States in other parts of the world, especially the Middle East, and how the United States is viewed and the role of information in all of that. But this is one of those moments where a politician made, I think, a fundamental error by saying something in public that was true. That's very dangerous. When, most politicians are smart enough never really to go into that territory. But who knows? Maybe Hillary Clinton just had a long day. But it strikes me she said something very interesting. I want to play this short clip now. Huh? Did you hear that? That was very interesting, yes? Hillary Clinton, who is Secretary of State for which country? This one. The United States, yes? Hillary Clinton, the United States Secretary of State, the top diplomat in the United States. And of course, we know Hillary Clinton is not just a diplomat, she's got a long career in politics. Whether you like Hillary Clinton or hate her, like her policies or not, that's not the point. The point is that's a quite remarkable statement. She said basically, TV news in this culture is junk. It doesn't tell, she said it's not very informative. It's just a bunch of people yelling at each other, talking heads. She said, now Al Jazeera, the network that started with an Arabic channel and now has an English language channel as well, Al Jazeera, a network that has been demonized in the United States as being a tool of the terrorists. We've talked about Al Jazeera before. She's saying, well, Al Jazeera, they got real news. She used the phrase real news, implying that what you get on US TV is somehow less than real. Right? Now, what's interesting about this is, again, like Hillary Clinton or hate her, there's a kind of tendency, you want to nod and say, yeah, a lot of American TV news is junk. It's just flash, it's argument, it's nothing. Right? So there's something very interesting. Now, Hillary Clinton took a lot of flack for this. Like I said, when politicians say something resembling the truth, it's often very dangerous for them. But there's something about what she's saying that I think we can't ignore. Let me, just for fun, because we're just back from break. We can have some fun, yeah? And we don't have to start with all the heavy stuff, right? Is there anybody who's willing to have some fun for a bit? Is that okay with you? All right. This is a British sort of comedian of sorts and critic. Let's take a look at his assessment of TV news.
Before long, a standard news report visual language established itself, one that's immediately recognisable to anyone. Me has this report. It starts here, with a lacklustre establishing shot of a significant location. Next, a walkie-talkie preamble from the auteur, pacing steadily towards the lens, punctuating every other sentence with a hand gesture and ignoring all the pricks milling around him like he's gliding through the fucking Matrix, before coming to a halt and posing a question. What comes next? Often something like this, a filler shot designed to give your eyes something to look at while my voice babbles on about facts. Sometimes it'll slow down to a halt, turn monochrome, and some of those facts will appear one by one on the screen. This is followed by the obligatory shots of overweight people with their faces subtly framed out, after which the report is padded out with a selection of lazy and pointless vox pops.
Usually get some inane chatter from people.
I think they do have too much. I think what we want to hear is actually what's happening and not what other people think of it.
I hate these sound bites. I don't want some punter's opinion usually. No.
Another bit of dull visual abstraction to plug another gap now before the report segues gracefully into a bit of human interest courtesy of some dowdy man opening letters in a kitchen and explaining how he's been affected by the issue.
When I'm watching the news, I don't really, there's a person talking to me, telling me what's going on, and I don't really listen to what they're saying. It's just news. It's just news.
He, unfortunately, was boring, so to wake you up, this is an animated chart, this is a silhouette representing the average family, and this is a lighthouse keeper being beheaded by a laser beam. As we near the end of the report, illustrative shots of pedestrians and signs and a pipe at a window. And then the final summary, ending on a whimsical shot of something nearby, accompanied by a wry sign-off. If you're lucky, a bit of wordplay fit for a king, or in other words, a regent's treat. Charlie Brooker, Newswipe, London.
I like that one. Okay, I mean, a lot of you were laughing. It was funny, yes? Why was it funny? It was funny because if you've ever watched television news, especially local TV news, but even network TV news, you recognize what he's parodying. Right? You recognize that television news, in its typical minute-and-a-half packages, really creates a kind of formulaic attempt to explain complex things in ways that really don't explain much of anything. And all of the jokes about the hand gestures, the kind of performance things that have become ritualized in TV news are part of what's absurd about it. Right? So there's a level at which we can critique journalism, especially television journalism. I don't want to just beat up on TV, but TV is particularly easy to make fun of in this culture. So there's a level of critique of journalism today that points at the kind of obvious absurdities. Right? Hillary Clinton talked about the talking heads. So we know that especially on cable television, but even on network television news, there are a lot of these programs where you get 2, 3, 4 folks who are allegedly debating an important public policy issue, but what it really feels like is they're just shouting at each other. We used to call these food fights on TV. And if you watch one of those segments, usually they're somewhere 4, 5, 6 minutes long, when you watch one of them, at the end of that segment, if you ask yourself, what do I know now that I didn't know at the beginning, the answer is often nothing. Right? You don't really gain information or insight from them. But they're provocative, they're often very emotional, they're good at attracting viewers, they might not be very good at deepening our understanding. Same with these kind of television news reports. Right? Very common, but what do we learn from them? Often not a whole lot. That's an important critique of how news works, but remember, we're also trying to go a bit deeper than that, and not just sort of target the easy and most absurd elements of contemporary news, but really look at the underlying ideas about news and to see where we might be able to do some critique of them as well. So that's why we spent so much time talking about neutrality and ideology. So again, I'm kind of revisiting some of the concepts that we did in the first half of the class.